Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us today as USITT continues our community conversations. My name is David Stewart, also known as D Stu in the industry, and my pronouns are he and him. And I currently reside on the stolen land of the Seminole people, also known as Orlando, Florida. For those of you who may not be able to see, I am a light-skinned black man, bald, as everyone likes to point out to me. I have a full beard that is black and gray. I am wearing glasses. Both of my ears are pierced with hoops, and I am wearing a black color shirt. I am the chair for USITT's ED&I committee, and today we are pleased to continue our community conversations with our focus today being on the LGBTQ plus community. I'm really thrilled that everyone's here. We have an amazing panel that is moderated by my friend, Calvin Anderson, and I now turn it over to him. You all have a great conversation.
Thanks, D-Stu. Hey, everybody. My name is Calvin Anderson. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I will be sort of moderating the conversations that we have here today, but I want to take a moment and let everybody introduce themselves. So if you could do your name, your pronoun, your location, and your current work landscape. So, for example, Calvin, he, him, they, them. I'm currently in Philadelphia, land of Lene Lenape, and I am working primarily as a production manager right now with the Bearded Ladies Cabaret out of Philadelphia, but I also identify as a lighting and projection designer. So I'm going to pass it to my left to Randy, if you'd like to start us off.
Hi folks, I'm Randy Wong Westbrook and I use they, them pronouns. I am primarily a scenic designer, born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, specifically on the land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. I've been out here for a few years since graduating from undergrad in upstate New York, and after being here for a few years, I'm heading off to get my MFA at UCLA, the School of Theater, Film, and Television this fall.
Thanks, Randy. Maya, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello. I'm Maya. My pronouns are she, her. Currently, I live in Rochester, New York. On unceded Haudenosaunee, and I currently work at Jiva Theater Center as a carpenter.
Thanks, Maya. Danny?
Hey, I'm Danny Taylor. I use he, they pronouns. Neurodivergent transmasculine man. Sorry. I'm currently the lighting and sound supervisor at Fordham University while maintaining a freelance lighting career. Currently, I'm shifting more into an academic mode and following theater for social change, and that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Frankie?
Hi, Frankie Charles, pronouns he, him. I'm currently in Minneapolis, or unceded Wapik Kute, Anishinaabe, and Sioux lands. I am currently the God, I just got this job and I've already forgotten what it's called. The Impact Department Coordinator at the Minnesota Opera. I was previously their resident artist assistant technical director. I have made my way to Minneapolis by way of Chicago, got my BFA at DePaul. And yeah, now I'm going from a technical direction career into a more equity, diversity, inclusion work. So yeah, that is my current trajectory.
Awesome. Thanks, Frankie. Yeah, and so as D-Stu introduced us, this is a conversation about LGBTQ, but I'm going to say that, most of us here are identifying on the trans and non-binary end of our world, and we haven't really talked about our queernesses in previous chats. So just to give as a caveat that we'll definitely be talking more about our gender expression, gender identity in relationship to our work today. And maybe for those of us who identify as queer, this might come into play, but definitely focusing more on the T in that alphabet soup, the T in the N and the B. So before we even get into all of that, I want to open us up to our first question of how did we get into theater? How did each of us individually start? And is there anyone who feels like they've got a good story to lead us into this? Frankie?
Yeah. So I got into theater really young, like middle school, high school, and at some point in high school just sort of decided that it was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And the definition of what I was going to do for the rest of my life has changed. And it's evolved, especially in the last 2 years. And but I got into theater because I could be myself and be trusted to do my job, regardless of what it was, and it was liberating just to have that trust, even at such a young age. So,
yeah, that's great. Thanks, Frankie. Danny, I'm wondering if you have anything you want to add about how you got into this business.
Yeah, I've always been into like music and the arts. So I was a band kid in high school and was literally just hanging out in the band room one day when all of the senior band kids was like, "You're auditioning for this." And I was a freshman, so I auditioned. I despised acting, but then very quickly found a lighting board and a soundboard, and the fact that I grew up in a mechanic shop could like actually be put to something artistic. Um, I was always a weird kid, still a weird adult, and it was just like a place where I could just be weird and it was okay. And now I'm doing it for a living, uh, which was a wild discovery because growing up in like Arkansas and rural Texas, I had no idea that you could actually do this as a career until I had that like one chance to see like the Wicked tour come through, because that was real big when I was in like middle school, high school, and it changed my life. And here I am, like 10 years later, 15 years later, something like that.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you, Maya? How'd you get into theater?
A lot of my career has just been a lot of stumbling into things, fortunately. And I think in high school, I just got roped into it by my friends. I had never considered it before, but then sort of was conscripted into auditioning for the musical. And I just kind of fell in love because I had never really been involved in sort of sports or other large group activities, and it was a good place to find somewhere that I fit, I think.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that big time. How about you, Randy?
Those little bits of everyone's story that I think taps into all of my experiences as well. Also started in high school, also was a band kid. And as you do in middle school, high school, sometimes your social circles shift, and I chose the group that allowed me to be myself as a baby little queer human, and those were the friends that stuck with me, and they were all in theater ensemble, and I never had any interest in being on stage, but found myself doing what I thought was stage managing and what I thought, conceiving of the set and world would be, but also didn't think it was a real thing until Wicked was coming through, and I got an opportunity to be backstage and see that, oh, this was a real thing, and really locked in. I think the fact that the majesty of it was maybe attainable, but the whole core of it being a place where I could be myself still rings true today as an adult, and I hope that remains to be true in any pathway I go down. It's about the people making space for all of us, I think, to play and be our fullest selves.
Yeah. And one thing I'm hearing sort of in all of our stories is that there was a feeling of being an outsider, and that somehow in theater or live entertainment, we felt a little bit less of an outsider in whatever way that was. And I certainly echo all of that. All of your stories echo with me as well. I started doing theater in high school, was feeling definitely like an outsider, and found a light board, and it was game on. And I just never stopped playing with lights after that, and feeling a little less alone, which I think is very important. And so my next question for all of us is there a moment when you knew theater was it for you, was the thing you wanted to go pursue as a job, as a career, as like the next step? Randy, you spoke a little bit about seeing Wicked. Is that related to this as well?
Yeah, I think I got to stand on the Orpheum stage, like where it all started, and touch the costumes and get told where the green baby was. So like that, there was a fan, I think, element to that, but I didn't understand the pathway to get there at all. Like I had no conception of how I would get to maybe there. Like that felt so far off. And it's not even necessarily what I want to be doing, is doing Wicked sort of shows, but I went to school initially to be like a social studies education major. Like I knew what being a teacher was, and I knew what history was, and I liked it. But it was then at my program at Ithaca College that I saw that there was a BFA program. There was a real pathway towards professional theater. But I'm just thinking of a couple of moments in my undergraduate theater experience that told me that theater was the right place. And I think some of those experiences, one was just learning of Che Yu, actually, the director and playwright, as just someone in theater that was queer and Asian, and I had that mirroring kind of for the first time ever, and that blew my world. And after that, just getting involved in organizations like USITT and certain internships like at OSF, where Edie and I work, was very active. Just again told me that I have a place in this. My voice is valuable in theater, and that's what's made all the difference. It's not about what I can do necessarily, the skills that I have, but the people who are making space for me to explore my ideas.
Yeah. Maya, I'm curious, did you have an aha moment, or was it just a slow trickle into like, this hits the buttons of what I'm enjoying?
I think there was a moment for me, sort of my senior year of high school, where I had just wrapped up doing that year's musical, and I was looking at college and what I wanted to do next, and I sort of didn't get into some of the schools I wanted to, and I was thinking about doing environmental engineering at that point. So very different, but I just realized that I didn't want to not be able to do this anymore. And so I looked at one of my safety schools and got on the very last audition of that year. Drove there in sort of a blizzard and somehow ended up here.
That's awesome. Frankie or Danny, do you have that moment? Sure thing.
Yes. And it was the senior year of high school. I was bound, set, and determined, like, back to music, even though I was doing theater that whole time. Like, I was bound, set, and determined to be a music major. And it was because, like, what I loved about that was the crowd, right? And the being a part of something whole. And so when I started going to theater shows just casually, and where I really shifted into, I'm going to do this for a living, was watching the audience. And there was just something about watching an entire collective space of people just kind of like surrender their lives for a second and all be in communion, in the same space and in the same story, and like all bringing their own realities to that, but then also taking away from it. I know that that's really heavy, but like that was it for me, because I had auditioned for the band and everything, but then just one show at the Little Rep Theater in Little Rock, Arkansas. I got to my university. The theater department had no idea who I was, and I just signed up and showed up. And then, yeah, that has been the thing that like constantly brought me back, was like doing shows and just sitting in the audience and watching people take away from something that I had been watching everyone else pour themselves into for like months.
That's beautiful, Danny. Thank you. I'm thinking about how, you know, like we were just saying, the feeling less alone, and, you know, seeing reflection in some way. And I'm wondering, did we see reflection in the other people that we were working with, or did we see reflection in the stories that were being told, or both? And like, you know, for example, yesterday I was on a plane ride coming back home, and I decided to watch Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which I had not seen in years and years and years. And I was like, oh, right, this was a really impactful story that was close enough to home for me, that it showed that there could be people like me making art, and it can be celebrated. And so it leads me to the next question of, like, you know, when was the first time you saw a queer or trans theater maker of any kind, or somebody who reflected to you what felt important? Hi, Frankie's cat. Frankie, your kitty cat is totally welcome in on this convo, by the way.
It's not about him. The world does not revolve around my cat Homer.
But do you have like a moment in your life where you remember seeing that reflection of, sort of like what you were saying, Randy, of seeing somebody who echoed what you wanted to be in the world, and was that impactful? And can you share more about it?
Well, who wants to go first, me or Frankie?
I can go because I didn't. Yeah, I'll go. So basically, USITT's Gateway program was like the start of my, like, oh, I can actually exist in this world kind of journey. The first year I went to USITT, I was thankful enough to be a part of the Gateway program, and I met Britton and Randy, and then eventually Calvin, and now we're just like a lovely little family. But yeah, USITT, and like we joke about drinking the Kool-Aid, but like there definitely is something to that, because we all just really enjoy each other, and appreciate each other. So it's USITT quite literally is part of the reason why I'm still in theater, just because it has opened up my world quite a bit.
Yeah, and just to give folks who may not fully know what the Gateway program is, just it was intended to bring early, younger career, still student, age theater makers, tech designers, technicians who belong to underrepresented groups to the USITT conference, and pair them with a mentor who may be mid or more advanced career, and pair them to create this mentorship relationship. And so when I went to Gateway, I was paired with Britton, and we both shared the moment, Britton and I, of being like the first trans set designer either of us had met in our lives. And I was out as a trans person then, but still trying to navigate the name I wanted to put forward out into the world. And I was just going by my first initial at that point. But upon seeing Britton in all his truth and being who he was, like it was that conference and like day 2 that I like got my name tag changed to say Randy on it. And like that was the time when, all right, this is it. Was upon meeting him, and then of course all the community that's come from that. So yay Britain, yay Gateway, yay friends.
Yeah, and I know that Britton is not here in this room, and I don't know if he's listening today, but I'm just gonna say like Britton Mock is definitely a big reason for all of this happening today, but also for Gateway happening. And similarly, as far as I knew, for the first 17 years of my career, I was the only professionally working trans lighting designer that I knew. And luckily, I don't have to hold that title anymore. But similarly, when I first heard about Britton as the designer in the world, somebody else had talked about him, and I was like, "Where is he? Can we be best friends right now? Please and thank you." So thank you, Britton, if you are listening. Maya and Danny, I'm curious if you have anything you'd like to share about the first time you saw or met or worked with another queer and trans theater maker, if that has been impactful to you.
I want to throw it to Maya to give you a chance to talk, but if not, all right, I'll go. I grew up in the rural South, kind of like I said, and I liked being a storyteller, and kind of what Randy said earlier, I resonate with. It was a place that I had a voice, but I was always alone, like pre-transition. Like I didn't even know what trans was until I left undergrad. I was like the only like queer in the department in any regard. I think there was like one other out and open queer human. And on top of that, I loved the storytelling, but I bloody hated the stories that we were telling. Because I never completely saw my reality or self in them. And I continued forward after undergrad, admittedly, just because I felt like, well, I'm here and this is what I'm doing. And then I moved to New York City, like came out and everything, and was still grappling with that. And then honestly, he's like sitting in the room. I like met Frankie one time, just like on this job. And it was just kind of one of those like Spider-Man moments, where it was like you. And then that like silo that I had been living in for my whole life just kind of like lifted. And through that, like Frankie, like thank you, because like really brought me introduced me to people in the Gateway program, introduced me to this entire trans and queer community that exists within the broader theater world, that I didn't know existed. And finding that space is what kind of like gave me the just like thing to remind me like, no, this is what I want to do. But then also it's kind of given me this fire to like start shifting, you know, the stories and start pushing to tell better stories that are more reflective of, you know, broader experiences. Just for me, like I said, it was always upper class, white family has some existential crisis. They find out they're miserable, and then the play is over. And that didn't resonate. But through this community, I'll wrap up my rambling. I'm starting to find those shows and that scene in theater and the voice that I want to have. And it's really just kind of brought me back into myself as an artist in so many ways.
Thanks, Danny. Maya, do you want to share?
I think for me, I haven't had a lot of experiences seeing myself reflected in the stories that I've been telling, but I've been fortunate enough to find a few people that I've gotten to work with that I've been able to identify and have some sort of support with. Obviously, so well, not obviously to anyone else, but so Frankie is the one who asked me to do this community conversation, and you know, we met at a summer stock that I had worked for before and was just doing some overhire at, and it was so interesting to see that a year later, I think it was, a year apart, we had the same job. And I was like, opposite me. You are also doing the tran. Anyways, but I just thought it was so interesting, and it was a lovely experience to see a little, I don't know, a little more of my community that is a little scarce sometimes in a familiar place.
I love that. Thanks for sharing, Maya. And so I want to switch gears a little bit from the Love Fest, that I don't want to stop. I just want to like broaden it a little bit into asking about, for all of us, how has your trans or non-binary identity played into the work that you are doing? So Maya, you were sort of talking about it, like you and Frankie were sharing same but opposite jobs, or same jobs a year apart. But has your either your trans journey or your non-binary journey played into either the work that you feel like you can do or how you do your work? Largest question of the series, easy answers.
I can start with this one. So I'd say it plays a huge part in my previous role as an ATD, especially in opera, which has a pretty binary existence. We were a union shop, worked at like a union roadhouse sort of thing. Because of my lived experience, I'd say that I am trained to hear things like sexism and other things that make the back of my neck get prickly. And it's taken some time, but I've learned that the more I pass as a cis male, the easier it is for me to disrupt things as I see them happening, or just comment about things without really having to worry about it in the same way as when I was younger. And there are I have a lot of feelings around why that is. It frustrates me quite a bit to be in a field that is supposed to be about expression, but in sort of the historical, I don't know, who the folks who've been doing my job historically have been unable to tap into all parts of their expression. And I find it limiting to me because then I'm expected to just be a masculine person in the room when that is my presence, but that doesn't completely define my experience. So I tough conversation or tough conversation.
Yeah, it's both tough and also, you know, like Frankie, as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, it makes 100% sense to me. I feel very similarly around, um, you know, being. I'm going to assume that I'm one of the older people in this room by a fair amount, but that I started transitioning when I was 21, 22, and pretty early in my career. But I did have a number of years. Um, Before I transitioned of being a woman in the theater industry and being a woman in the technical theater industry and seeing firsthand how difficult to impossible some corners of our industry can be for folks, and then to transition to being perceived, you know, similarly like what you were saying, Frankie, as a cis male person, like the privilege that is just sort of tossed out in my direction has been a palpable change. And for me, I tried to use that privilege, you know, use those powers for good. Um, like what you were saying, Frankie, to like call out sexism when you see it, to call out ableism when you see it, to call out racism when I see it, to use every inch of that white male privilege that I didn't necessarily ask for, but that I still have, to make sure that the most vulnerable among us are being protected. And I, yeah. So, not, you know, yeah. Maya, I'm curious if you have anything you want to add to this, unless you're frozen. Oh no, you're just muted. Sorry.
I think for me it can be a bit of a mixed bag. In some ways, I think I've learned to have a bit of a thicker skin, and so sometimes compared to sort of my cis woman counterparts or coworkers, I think I feel a little bit more comfortable calling out misogyny and sort of other kinds of negative rhetoric or whatever in the workplace, but also in terms of my sort of gender presentation. I have some strange experiences where being sort of a more, I guess, masculine presenting woman, the times when that sort of undermines my womanhood to the people around me, and where I either, you know, partially because of that, may not read as a woman or may not pass in that sense, which can be frustrating, but also sometimes my presentation can be sort of an easy out for me. It's not a comfortable out, and it's not ideal, but there have definitely been times where I've been in situations where I really don't want to have that fight or that conversation about, no, that is not who I am, this is. And it's a bit easier to slip back into, I guess I'd call it boy mode, and sort of hide. And it is staggering, the difference in treatment, obviously, but it's sort of interesting to watch it on a minute-to-minute basis, like flip on and off or whatever. So I don't know, it can be a very complicated experience, I think. And I think there are times when, theater is perceived to be sort of, I don't know, I guess a very queer community and fairly open, but there are definitely times, sometimes particularly in tech theater, sometimes in performance, where it's really very heteronormative and kind of an old boys club. So you really get a front row seat to all the strange and unique ways that is true, I have to say.
Yeah, it's, like code switching is what comes to mind when I hear you talk, Maya. Like, as somebody who has toured all over the country with various different companies, like figuring out how to get that crew to work with you in the first 30 seconds of the day and what's going to be the best way to get the crew to do what you need for the limited amount of time that you've got to work with them, and how gender is absolutely baked into all of that, and feeling like, there's the first thing of like, how do I get this crew to do what I need to do for the day to get the show up, but then also how do I keep myself as safe as possible, knowing that safety is a wide spectrum, but that if you're in Arkansas, in middle of nowhere, Arkansas, doing a show for the day, being an out non-binary person and being read as non-binary might have a very different perception for the local crew than just looking like a dude, or just like going into whatever box is most convenient. Not necessarily for myself, but for them. Frankie, please.
I guess to that point, I do want to just acknowledge that there, and I guess in my gender expression journey, I've knowingly stuck to the masculine side of things because it's safer. And it's safer for a lot of reasons that I am okay with and that really, really trouble me, because I don't want to be limited to something just so I can survive. But at the end of the day, sort of like what Calvin, you were saying, if I have to walk onto a stage and I have to lead a crew, the fastest and easiest way for me to do that is for them to let them assume that I'm a cis hetero male. Like I've had guys come up to me, assume I've been married, and I'm like, absolutely not, dude. I look like I'm 12. What are you talking about? But yeah, and it becomes like this awkward point of reference where it's like, ha ha ha, no, I'm not like that. I'm not, yeah. And it becomes a battle that's not worth fighting, because it's just, I'm with this person for 24, 48 hours. Letting them believe what they want is just going to get what I need to get done faster. So.
Randy, you were going to say something too?
Yeah, so much has been coming up from these conversations, and I feel sometimes I'm in a slightly different realm because I'm not as much of a technician anymore. But when I am talking with the TD or going on a shop visit, and say it's a more masculine run kind of shop, I actually, the dialogue that goes through my head is, all right, what am I going to wear? What's going to feel like affirming, but also like make me seem authoritative, whatever that means. Can I wear my cap that has flowers on it? Can I wear a dangling earring? Is that going to feel okay? If it's a like, I find that if it's a more women run shop or femme in an energy shop, I feel comfortable wearing whatever. And so there's that code switching again. It's the kind of handshake that I do. I can't grow facial hair for my life, so I can't ever, like, I think, wear that kind of masculinity. So again, how I generally talk, I think, in a little higher pitched of a voice, or do I want to talk lower to have that more authoritative kind of voice, depending on who I'm talking to. And like that navigation in the professional work is every day. When I'm in a meeting, say a production meeting or a design meeting, and it's mostly women or femmes in the room, I'm very conscientious of the masculine energy that I have, but I also feel very non-binary. And it's again a navigation for myself, wanting to lift up the women and femmes in the room, but am I also forgetting like myself at the same time? And that's something I've had to juggle on what my own identity is versus what I may be perceived as, especially if it's people who don't know me as well. Stepping into corporate work, it's a different realm. And so asking people to correct my pronouns might not be worth it. And that's something I just navigate and have to let roll off my shoulder until I feel like it's safe to maybe say something. But it takes time, it takes trust, and that constant vigilance can really wear you down.
Yeah, and I feel like Randy, you spoke so beautifully about this, but like it's code switching across like parallel axes all at the same time in multiple directions. Like how I interact with the four of us here is definitely like the closest to authentic, right? Like there's room for my queerness, there's room for my transness, there's room for my non-binary identity, baked into all of it, and that it flows really easily. But you're absolutely right. Depending on who I'm talking to, I will code switch immediately about like how much do I have to tone down my queerness, or how much do I have to like pull back anything that reads as less than masculine, in order to achieve the goal. Maybe my goal, maybe the goal of the production, and how it changes moment to moment depending on who I'm interacting with, and it it just becomes an ingrained part of every moment of outside life, and it can be draining. And yeah, and Frankie, go ahead.
To your point about it draining, I'll add another lens to all of that. But just all of that code switching, and then for myself specifically, I've got the fact that I'm like Cuban American, person of color, and what all that brings to the table, and navigating being of mixed identities and of fluid expression, and I run into a lot of interesting cultural roadblocks, but there has been nothing quite like, I think, what I'll call the like the inability to imagine anything more than how we already exist, because I don't know, being trans is sacred. I've really sort of loved that sort of sentiment. There's so much in our intersectionality and our duality and all of it. And yeah, I'm very thankful for this group of people and this conversation because it is so exhausting.
Yeah, ditto to that, Frankie. I agree completely, and the intersections of identities are so important to talk about and to hold space for, because none of us are a monolith. Like, none of us are just queer or just trans or non-binary. And I'm wondering if there's anybody else who wants to say anything about, you know, where your intersections of identities play into how you make, how you design, how you be in the world, you know, beyond theater. Danny, or
Yeah. So much has been addressed. Wow. I'm gonna just like fast forward, discovering how rigid the binary is for human beings, just kind of at large, has been fascinating. Prior to transition, I was seen as a female working in primarily metal shops, and I was somehow never feminine enough, but then would find myself being too feminine in some exhibition, or yeah, and then moving into being trans masculine, there was all of this expectation of my masculinity, and now I'm on the other side of being sometimes too masculine or not masculine enough. I'm gonna take Calvin. So dipping into being, in particular, a white passing man and a white passing cis straight man. I got that language backwards. Sorry. I'm a white, straight, cis passing trans man. And the kind of just like privilege that just kind of like got thrown on me like some weird heavy blanket, and kind of coming through that and unpacking it, but then flipping into the other side of finding out what I can do with that. And I've learned kind of my upfront mask pretty well at this point. And so just for me, in unpacking all of this and recognizing it, I like to sit in space and have people sit in their perception of me for a little while, and then listen and get to know. And just kind of out of left field, I'll hear something that just doesn't sit right, and I have to say, and I'll just drop it, or I'll drop it casually in a conversation, just to kind of like hit those brakes and use that moment to come out and be like, yeah, you thought you were safe saying this, but let's talk about it. Being an academic, I like am kind of overly out right now, because I need my students to know that there is somebody in the room who has an iota of experience that they do, so that I can be that voice for them. And that's a big challenge. I am finding myself embracing it more and more and more, because it feels like a responsibility. Yeah.
thanks, Danny. Randy, you were going to say something as well?
Yeah, just going to the question of how, you know, different parts of our trans and gender identity, you know, intersect with our race, class, like all those things. And speaking to the, you know, we're not a monolith. We are complex human beings. Just as part of my own journey as a human, and then an artist, my queerness and race have felt very bifurcated, or that I am maybe tokenized in a room as one or the other. And so that division is something in my own personal and professional life trying to blend right now. And thinking of one example, for my professional website and like my email address and what's on my business cards, I made a choice in undergrad that I wanted to hide my gender and I wanted to hide my race, so that I would be hired for my talent and my skill and not because of who I am. And now that I've been working for a little bit, I so much want to be known for all of these things. And so I want for my last name, which is Wong Westbrook, to be part of my professional name, to be part of my URL, to be part of my email address. And I want my business cards, which don't currently have my pronouns on them. I need to rebrand myself. And there's a beautiful thing, I think, when you transition as a student or later in your life to like rebrand yourself and, come out to the world in a more authentic way. But I also want to name like the financial burden of that. Obviously there's like legal name change stuff, which I haven't done, partially because of the financial reasons, but there's more to that. But it's going to cost me money to get new business cards and like a whole new just time and effort to change my website, change my email. It's all possible, but the main reason I feel like now is the time to do it is going back to school. I'm gonna step out for a little bit and figure out what it is I want to do, and I'm gonna have the resources to come out again, as we do every day, as the fullest version of myself as a person and a professional. And for me, I want it truly to encompass both my racial identity and my gender and sexual identities, sexual orientation identities. So the intersectionality is becoming more rich, I feel, as the years go on. And being seen again, being able to be yourself, being seen as the whole person that you're at. I feel like there's institutions and leaders that still have yet to figure out how to do that. So that's my statement.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah, and I think that you lead us into a beautiful next question, which is, how can I feel like over the arc of time, we as an industry are moving in the right direction. We are generally being more inclusive of pronouns. We are being more inclusive of letting people arrive as they are, fully and completely, into space, and not have to code switch it at the same level as we used to have to. And we're not there yet, and we will never arrive. But do any of us have like quick, easy ideas of how institutions and allies can show up better for us, for other non-binary and trans art theater makers of any and all kinds? Frankie, curious
your HR department should brush up on everything and anything that they can do for their for trans employees, non-binary employees. It is a nightmare having to navigate the healthcare system in any capacity, but also having to navigate a healthcare system where not everyone recognizes who you are, is awful. And I've found that there are actual resources in sort of in mutual aid circles. There are ways that you can ask folks to like be there with you if you have to make a call, or that there are people that can be advocates for you. This is a tip that I've learned recently. There are like birth workers and doulas that also do transition work, so they can like help you through a part of your transition, which I didn't know and would have been really helpful when I had gone through top surgery. But now that I'm looking at like my next steps, it's something that an elder was kind enough to help me figure out. Now I have this wonderful human being helping me with the next steps of my transition. So there are resources out there, but especially if someone's coming to a new city or region, like we barely have time to like pack our homes in between jobs. Like there's usually no time to like look for queer friendly healthcare. So if you're running a summer stock or you're expecting some sort of like resident capacity people to show up, do some of that for them, because that is like the very least anyone could do.
Awesome. Yeah, Randy.
Like on that note, thinking of summer stock, you may have people coming from all over, and may have, you know, certain insurance rules for in-state, out-of-state, you know, all those things that us queer and trans folks, we're everywhere. And so if there is a company that is trying to figure out, you know, what they should do about their bathrooms, or what they should do about, you know, putting pronouns in programs and such, of course, there are nationwide, industry-wide conversations about some good norms and practices. But I strongly would impress that it's most important to listen to what your local queer and trans community wants and needs, what language they want for their restrooms, not what, you know, Broadway's doing, not what the Lord theaters are doing. Like, what does your community want and need? Because that has to be community centered, and have input and pay people to give you input for the changes you may need to make in your institution. But to know what's happening right outside your door, I think, is paramount.
Beautiful. Danny, did you want to say something too?
Frankie and Randy hit it. Just like putting a preferred name on an application is not enough. And what Randy said, like, pay people for their labor. Not a single one of us is a monolith, and people get hyper excited when they're like, trans person, you can answer my questions. No. Because we're carrying that labor that has already been stated. Just like, companies really do need to invest a little bit more in the self-learning process and utilizing other resources that are not just the single trans person in your community. That's my big, just like, want to tie that.
Thanks, Danny. Maya, is there anything you want to add in?
Yeah, I think sort of to say something about actions you can take in the workplace. I think it's really important to, first of all, to actually talk to and ask your trans coworkers, you know, before you start taking big action. If you're not sure if they want you to, I don't know, correct people on pronouns or things like that. And, you know, just to check in with them if there's something that someone has been doing that's making them uncomfortable, if they don't feel comfortable saying it themselves. I have literally never in my entire life corrected someone about my pronouns myself, because I'm kind of terrified to do it, despite being pretty confident and out and everything like that. But I think you can monitor each other and correct each other. That goes such a long way, because it is emotional labor, and it is exhausting. And it feels wonderful to have someone there who has your back. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Maya. I appreciate that. And I'm just looking at my clock, and we have hit the next hour. And so I want to wrap us up, and I want to thank y'all so much for your time and for your energies and sharing your wisdom with all of us here. And I think David Grindle might be somewhere in the background to see us out.
Hi, thank you all for really a wonderfully deep conversation to get to know you all a little better. It's really an honor and a privilege to call you colleagues. So thank you. USITT will continue our community conversations monthly as we seek to give voice to people in our industry whose voices don't always rise to the top or get drowned out by others. And so we hope you'll keep looking on our website and through our social media to find our continuing community conversations. Community conversations and other things are supported by the Tanisha Jefferson Fund for Inclusion, which supports USITT's work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. You can find out more at our website. Again, thank you all, and thank you to everyone who joined us today or is watching and recording. Take care, everyone.